Hello readers, I'm Amy. This was originally going to be a reading vlog so I could catch you up on my reading as I went about it, but I did a really bad job on keeping up with that, so I'm just going to talk about all of the books now. This is essentially a wrap-up. I decided to do a project with the Storygraph, not like with the Storygraph, I am not working with them personally, but with my Storygraph app. Do you have to hit the camera? Anyways, so the Storygraph, if you're not already familiar, it's kind of like Goodreads, but way, way better because it actually works and the website is actually updated. They are in beta right now, so it's not like their official end-all be-all website, but it's something that they're working on. You're hitting the camera. Get tail out of the way. Yeah, so they're working on the beta site right now. They take suggestions from people on Twitter who are like, well, this is what I would like to see in my reading stuff. And one of the things that you can do is pick out some books for you. So I'm like, oh, that would be really interesting. So I went ahead on there and said like, all right, pick some books for me based off my reading, and I think I filled out a little form for it and everything. I mostly read fiction, which is true. I don't read nearly as much nonfiction as I thought I did. And I tend to go for books that are reflective, emotional, and dark. Especially this year I'm noticing a lot of the dark and emotional stuff. I choose medium-paced books that are 300 to 499 pages long, and I can also hit see my reading stats, because Storygraph is like, hey, you guys like stats, let's give you some stats. I met my goal of reading 100 books this year by some sort of miracle. I've actually gone a bit over that. And here we go, moods. I will try and record something so I can put this all up on the screen. So, reflective, dark, I like books that are challenging, emotional, mysterious, adventurous, tense, a little bit informative, like it's a big enough chunk there, and then they've got some other things on here. Tend to read medium-paced books, like I already said, the page count. Star ratings on Storygraph, I have an average of 4.03, so I am reading some really great books this year. Also, for those of you who are like, oh, but I'm really dedicated to my Goodreads and I put a lot of work into it and I don't know that I could do the big switch over, you can give your Goodreads link to Storygraph and they will just put all your information on there, and it's great. So there's not really even any work to put into it. And in general, it's just so much better. I'm not being paid or sponsored by the Storygraph for this at all. I just thought, hey, let's look at some of the books that they say I want to read. So, based on those things, liking emotional and reflective and dark stories, they came up with a list. You're laying on my stats. And, I went through the list and I picked out some books that not only that looked interesting to me from the Ordered For You page, but also that were more immediately available. So if there was a book that I wanted to read but it wasn't available from the library for like another 6 months, then I wasn't going to pick it up. Because I wanted to get this project out quick, I wanted to have some fun with it. So let's go ahead and talk about the books that I was recommended. First book that I read that I was recommended... First book I read that I was recommended was The Roanoke Girls by Amy Engel. This is a sexual assault kind of mystery. You have this family where all of the women have either disappeared or died through the generations, and this woman comes to like hang out with her family. It's been a little while since I read this, like a month, and there's been a lot of books in between, so forgive me if I'm not as detailed as I should be. And you've got this really creepy couple that she's staying with who are like her aunt and uncle or her grandparents or something. I did really like her writing style. It's got this very mysterious kind of creepy vibe to it. You're like, what happened to all of these women? Why did they disappear or die? Why did they mostly, I think, die? Like, what's going on with the women in this family? What's up with this curse? And for sexual assault book, if you've seen my sexual assault videos, you know that like it seems to be a niche of mine that I like reading. I wouldn't necessarily put this as a beginner book for people who are new to the genre. It's not the worst, so it does involve some discussion of sexual assault and you know that the sexual assault is happening, but it doesn't go into the detail of it. You're not hearing about it as it happens or happened. So it's nice that it skipped that part. And I mean, I'd recommend it if you're looking for something kind of dark and creepy. Like I said, not a beginner, but it's not super hard to get through some of that stuff for me personally. And I really enjoyed her writing style. Next book that I read that I was recommended was Saint X by Alexis Shaitkin. This one, again, I feel like a lot of the books that I picked up were like mystery thrillers. This one was definitely my least favorite on this list that I read, and I still ended up giving it like pretty solid 3 stars. But you're on this island with these rich people all on their vacations and stuff, and this girl dies, and for me the point of the book was like, well, let's figure out what happened. Let's look at these different characters. You've got some multiple character perspectives going on here. You're reading about people's lives and how they connect to each other. But not only was it really, really slow-paced, which isn't a bad thing, and I'm tending to like slow-paced more than I thought I did, but it kind of meandered for a while, and by the time I got to the end, I'm just like, is that it? You've been dragging me along for all this time, and that's it? Like, the writing was nice enough. The story was meh. It's one of those books where it discusses race. So a lot of the serving people on this island are non-white. They're people of color. And it does try to have kind of a conversation about that, about class and about race. And it was one of those books where it felt forced in rather than being a natural part of the conversation, so I didn't love that. Not mad I read it, but definitely wasn't my favorite book on this list. And then I read The Gone Dead. This was another mystery thriller. I feel like I don't actually read that many mystery thrillers, but they tend to be parts of the books that I end up liking and that ended up boosting up my stats on this site. But hey, I'm not mad. I need to read more mystery thriller. I love it. So The Gone Dead is a race-based mystery. You have this black woman who comes back to like the town that she grew up in, and her dad had died a couple years ago. Now she's like looking around at the house. She's getting things closed up and packed away and learning a little more about her family. So her dad was this really famous writer, and she's talking to people about her dad, and she finds out that at one point as a child she had disappeared. And she's like, well, I didn't know that I disappeared. You'd think I would remember something like that. And as she goes, she's starting to suspect, like, maybe something's fishy about her dad's death. What's up with no one really wanting to talk to me? What's going on here? And one of her neighbors that the family has a complicated relationship with is a white family, and back, maybe 2 generations, they were slave owners and they owned the family that this black woman is coming from. So it was a really interesting aspect to it where they were going through this kind of racial history between the families and how they interacted then, how they interact now, and kind of how that history affected them. Definitely really enjoyed this one. Then, my first Indigenous author of the year, which I'm a little ashamed about. I have some Indigenous authors on my shelves, I just haven't gotten to them this year because I keep getting distracted, which is my excuse for all of the books that I haven't read this year, is I just keep getting distracted by all the other books. I read The Break by, I believe it's pronounced Katarina Vermette, Indigenous author, and this one is all from the perspective of women. You have multiple character perspectives, which I know isn't something that everyone's into. I tend to like multiple character perspectives, and they're all Indigenous women. I can't remember how they're related to one another, but it's mostly characters who are of a family relationship of some kind or another, and you have the people who are really kind of down on their luck, and they've got family involved in drugs. They're kind of involved in it themselves. You have someone who's been in and out of treatment facilities for mental illness and for being violent and everything. You have a family member who died recently. Then for the mystery of the book, you have supposedly someone was attacked and raped outside of this one woman's house, and she's really upset about it. She's trying to talk to the police about it, but it's not really getting anywhere. And then you move on to kind of the other family members and what's going on. You meet the people who were kind of involved in this attack, but you're still not really sure what happened. It was another one that really kind of took its time with revealing the mystery, but I absolutely loved it. I loved the really amazing female characters. I loved the complexity of it. The pacing was slow, but also like really made me want to keep reading to see like, well, what are we going to find out next about this family? So highly recommend that one. And I believe I have 2 more books to read. So the 5th season, I wasn't initially going to include in this little kind of personal readathon because it's a chunker and it's fantasy, and I was nervous to read it because I kept hearing about how difficult it was to get into. But I was really wanting a good fantasy to read. So I'm like, you know what? I'm up for a longer book right now. I need something that I can take my time on and sink into. So I started reading this a couple weeks ago. And I'd gotten probably a third of the way through it before I restarted it. There is an appendix at the back of this book, so you can look up some of the words that she uses, some of the terminology that's specific to this world. I was really enjoying it, but I was reading it slower than I would have liked to, so I was reading like a couple of pages in a sitting and felt like I wasn't doing a great job of keeping track of everything. And I had read through it quickly enough that it's like, well, I can start it again. So I restarted it and was really enjoying it. It's like, okay, I know what's going on with this. I got this. And got halfway through it, and then life stuff happened, and I'm at that point where I'm like, I'm really enjoying this book, but I might have to put it down, because what if I forget what happened, and maybe I need a lighter read right now, and then one night it's like, you know what, I'm gonna push through a little farther, see if I'm keeping track of everything okay, and pushed through it, and I finished it really quickly, and I absolutely loved this. So don't get too freaked out about my struggles with this, because they were very personal to me. I have been dealing with a lot of life stuff lately, which really has been getting in my head and making me think like maybe I'm not up for a book that's this thick and this involved, and there's 2 other books in the series. What if I can't keep track of it all? It really related to my personal life and what was going on. But I've had a lot of people be like, well, this is really hard to get into, but if you can get into it, it's really good. I didn't really get that from this. Like, I loved it, and as long as you can keep track of things in the appendix and make sure to be looking up your terminology and everything, it wasn't hard to get into at all. The magic system is very based on Earth and earthquakes and kind of a natural disaster sort of magic. This is a dystopia series. And it's almost multiple dystopias. Like, if you think of a dystopia in that the society you knew ended because of disaster and had to restart again, it's been multiple dystopias. So the world kind of ends over and over again when this 5th season appears. So you have like your 4 seasons naturally over the years, and then something happens to create this big national disaster that could last decades or even like a century, where something happens with the oceans or with the fault lines, and then mushrooms grow, and that interrupts all the crops, and they have to be really good at storing their stuff. There is actually, in one of these appendices, there's the different seasons that are mentioned. So you have the choking season, which is a 5th season that happened at some point. You have the fungus season, which is the mushrooms I was talking about. There's the season of yellow seas that came along at one point. So it goes over kind of the different seasons and what exactly a 5th season is. But I didn't find it hard to follow at all. Another thing that people have complained about this, there are 3 perspectives that we're following. We're following Demaya, Cyanite, and Essen, all different ages, and as we follow these women, we're getting some slightly different writing styles for this. So there are some more normal, regular writings for Essen, but for the most part, her story is told in second person. I didn't really have an issue with that. When I first started reading second person, I believe it was for Three Women, which I read last year, and it took a little bit to get into. But I've read another book or two with second person, so maybe it's just because I'm a little more familiar with it. The second person writing didn't really bother me at all. If it does bother you, it's something that's in here quite a bit. So almost every one of Essen's chapters, and it kind of goes between the three of them, is in second person. So maybe those chapters take your time with. And I can understand why it would bother some people, but it was something that I really enjoyed, not only because it's different and it's nice to see people experiment a little bit, but I feel like the second person was used to help you get more into her head, into this character. Because a big kind of theme with this book was race relationships. Like, she's got these different races in this world, and here's how they're interacting with each other, and the people that are magical, they're really looked down on. They're really hated because of their magic. And it has that discussion of hating someone for something that they can't help, or looking down on someone for something. Like, it has a really great racial discussion in here that I appreciated. And for Essen's character, like, she's dealing with being magical and being looked down on. We have this book start with her son being killed, and she's going through trying to find the person who did it, and you're really getting into her head through this second person. Be like, imagine if you were in this position. That's what I think the author's trying to say with this, is be like, imagine you were there. How would you feel with that? So 5 stars for me. I really loved this. I can't wait to continue the series. I got a hold of Angela from Lit Science Alliance because she was talking about it a lot on her channel, and I messaged her and I'm just like, this book, oh my gosh. So if you're interested in trying it, try it. Just keep track of the appendix. Like I said, you can look at the different seasons. It kind of tells you a bit about the races. It is very, very dark. This is a dystopia. There's lots of child death and child abuse. That is not something that really bothers me personally, but be careful if that's something that bothers you, because then this series might not be the one that you're after. Last book that I read, I finished about an hour ago, and it was another Amy Engel book. So, as I said previously, she is the one that wrote the Roanoke Girls, and this one was The Familiar Dark. And in the first chapter, we have 2 girls who are killed, and we look at their families throughout the book. Particularly, we're following the mother of one of the girls, and she's like, why did this happen? Who did this? I have to figure it out. Again, this book was really heavy on abuse, not as much abuse currently in the story, but more looking at her abusive past, her abusive family, the stuff that she dealt with growing up, and how she didn't want to pass that on to her girl, and how maybe if she'd been tougher, maybe if she'd been harder on her daughter and harder on the people around her, then no one would have messed with her. And it's just kind of this looking at herself and who she turned out to be, and if she'd turned out to be a different person, would it have changed anything? And again, I loved this. I actually liked this more than Roanoke Girls. I liked Roanoke Girls, but this one just really, it's what I need right now. I'm looking for that creepy stuff. There is some pedophilia and sexual assault, but it's not really discussed in too much detail. It's not the main part of the book, but just be aware that it's there. So you've got abuse, you've got pedophilia. Look at the books that I read. Like, sometimes I gotta wonder if something's wrong with me, but to each their own. Really loved it. Haven't rated it yet. I'm gonna sit on it for a bit. It's probably gonna be 4.5 or 5 stars. And I listened to the audiobook for both this one and the Roanoke Girls. I honestly am not usually super into female narrators for whatever reason. They just tend to read a little robotic for me. But the person or persons reading Amy Engel's books are really, really good. Particularly The Familiar Dark. She did a great job with creating different voices for each of the characters, and just, I recommend the audiobook. It's really good. And that's what I got to say. So basically, I took a bunch of books that the Storygraph recommended me, and they were generally pretty great. I'm really happy with it. Of all of these books, there was one book that just didn't quite turn out for me. It was still a 3 stars. Like, it wasn't bad, it just wasn't for me. It's not what I was looking for, because it was more of like a character study than an actual plot. But again, personal taste. I'm really happy with it. So, please check out the Storygraph. Again, this is not sponsored. I just think they're really great and you should support them, and they're better than Goodreads in every possible way. Please like, subscribe, follow me on social media, be my friend on social media, follow my adventures, and I will see all of you in my next video. Bye, friends.